Here is a list of inventors who were killed by their own inventions. William Nelson was an American inventor and an employee of General Electric in Schenectady, New York. In New York State, Nelson tested a new motorized bicycle he had invented. While trying out the motor bicycle on a hill opposite the home of his father-in-law, William H. Sterling, Nelson fell from the machine and was instantly killed at the age of 24. Francis Edgar Stanley, also known as F.A. Stanley, was an American businessman and was the co-founder, along with his twin brother Freeland Oscar Stanley, of the Stanley Motor Carriage Company, which built the Stanley steamer. He and his twin brother, Freeland Oscar Stanley, learned to carve violins as taught by their grandfather, Liberty Stanley, at the age of 10. He attended Western State Normal School, now known as the University of Maine at Farmington. While F.O. initially became a teacher, F.A. took a different path, moving to Lewiston, Maine, and opening a photography studio. Within a few years, the studio was one of the largest in New England, and his twin brother eventually joined him in the business. During that time, they patented a machine for coating mass quantities of dry plates and set up the Stanley Dry Plate Company, Watertown, Massachusetts. That business had over $1 million in annual sales. However, the brothers abandoned photography when they became interested in automobile development and sold the dry plate business to George Eastman of Eastman Kodak for $500,000. However, the family's connection to photography continued with the career of the Stanley twins' younger sister, Chansonetta Stanley Emmons. The Stanley Motor Carriage Company, the next business venture of the brothers, was a steam car manufacturing company based in Newton, Massachusetts. The brothers designed their first car that very year, which became a hit among the wealthy automobile enthusiasts. A Stanley steam car, the Rocket, achieved the land speed record at 127 miles per hour. He died in Wenham, Massachusetts, when he drove his car into a woodpile while attempting to avoid farm wagons traveling side by side on the road. Franz Reichelt, also known as Franz Reichelt or Francois Reichelt, was an Austro-Hungarian-born French tailor, inventor, and parachuting pioneer, now sometimes referred to as the Flying Tailor, who is remembered for jumping to his death from the Eiffel Tower while testing a wearable parachute of his own design. Reichelt had become fixated on developing a suit for aviators that would convert into a parachute and allow them to survive a fall should they be forced to leave their aircraft in mid-air. Initial experiments conducted with dummies dropped from the 5th floor of his apartment building had been successful, but he was unable to replicate those early successes with any of his subsequent designs. Observed by a crowd of about 30 journalists and curious onlookers, Reichelt readied himself facing towards the scene on a stool placed on a restaurant table next to the interior guardrail of the tower's first deck, a little more than 187 feet above the ground. After adjusting his apparatus with the assistance of his friends and checking the wind direction by throwing a piece of paper taken from a small book, he placed one foot on the guardrail, hesitated for about 40 seconds, then leapt outwards. According to Le Figaro, he was calm and smiling just before he jumped. His parachute, which had seemed to be only half open, folded around him almost immediately, and he fell for a few seconds before striking the frozen soil at the foot of the tower. Le Petit Parisien reported that Reichelt's right leg and arm were crushed, his skull and spine broken, and that he was bleeding from his mouth, nose, and ears. Le Figaro noted that his eyes were wide open and dilated. He was already dead by the time onlookers rushed to his body, but he was taken to the Necker Hospital where he was officially pronounced, and then onto a police station in the Rue Amélie before being returned to his home in Rue Gaillon. Edward Launed, writing in the summer supplement of Liberation, mentioned that an autopsy concluded that Reichelt had died of a heart attack during his fall. Marie Salomea Sklodowska-Curie was a Polish and naturalized French physicist and chemist who conducted pioneering research on radioactivity. She was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, the first person to win a Nobel Prize twice, and the only person to win a Nobel Prize in 2 scientific fields. Her husband, Pierre Curie, was a co-winner of her first Nobel Prize, making them the first ever married couple to win the Nobel Prize and launching the Curie family legacy of 5 Nobel Prizes. She was the first woman to become a professor at the University of Paris. She died at age 66 at the Saint-Salome's Sanatorium in Passy, Haute-Savoie, from a plastic anemia believed to have been contracted from her long-term exposure to radiation, causing damage to her bone marrow. The damaging effects of ionizing radiation were not known at the time of her work, which had been carried out without the safety measures later developed. She had carried test tubes containing radioactive isotopes in her pocket, and she stored them in her desk drawer, remarking on the faint light that the substances gave off in the dark. Curie was also exposed to X-rays from unshielded equipment while serving as a radiologist in field hospitals during the war. In fact, when Curie's body was exhumed, the French Office de Protection contre les Rayonnements Ionescents concluded that she could not have been exposed to lethal levels of radium while she was alive. They pointed out that radium poses a risk only if it is ingested, and speculated that her illness was more likely to have been due to her use of radiography during the First World War. Karel Soucek was a Czech professional stuntman living in Canada who went over Niagara Falls in a barrel. He lived in Hamilton, Ontario. As Soucek was enclosed in his barrel 180 feet above the floor of the Astrodome, the barrel was released prematurely and began spinning as it fell toward the floor. Instead of landing in the center of the tank of water, the barrel hit the rim. Foam pads, which had been placed at the bottom of the tank to cushion Soucek's fall, had floated to the surface before the barrel was released. Soucek, severely injured, was still alive when he was cut from the barrel, but died while the Astrodome stunt show was still going on. Stuntman Evel Knievel had tried to persuade Soucek not to go through with the stunt, calling it the most dangerous I've ever seen. Soucek is buried at the Drummond Hill Cemetery in Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada. Max Valier was an Austrian rocketry pioneer. He was a leading figure in the world's first large-scale rocket program, Opel RAK, and helped found the German Vorn-Führerraumschifffahrt that would bring together many of the minds that would later make spaceflight a reality in the 20th century. The VIR was focusing its efforts on liquid-fueled rockets. Their first successful test firing with liquid fuel occurred in the Haylant plant. Valier performed the first test drive of a rocket car with liquid propulsion, the Valier Haylant RAK 7. Valier was killed less than a month later when an alcohol-fueled rocket